Hi, it's Mike Hughes here. Today what I'd like to do is just show you a little bit about how listing syndication works. And I guess not so much how it works, but what to expect from the various websites that you might be searching to find listings and understanding why sometimes the statuses show up differently from one site to the next. Right now I'm literally logged into the multiple listing service. This is the part of the system that agents log into. It's not too fancy, it's kind of a technician sort of looking website, but basically if we look around here, the key thing that I want to show you is just a little bit about what we see. As agents, we're looking on the back end and we're seeing these different statuses, and just looking through here you can see that this property UAG means under agreement. This is new. This is contingent. So UAG means that the property is under agreement and they've accepted and received an offer that basically binds the seller to selling the property to the buyer. There's no way to get around that. If the buyer wants it, they basically have the house. The same goes for contingency. So that's a new status that the MLS created. It's kind of an unnecessary status, but the difference between the two, because they both mean that there's a binding contract between the buyer and the seller, the difference is that contingent means that maybe there's a few more hurdles for the buyer and the seller to overcome, like a home inspection or a mortgage contingency or something along those lines. But the seller still is bound to sell the property to the buyer. Before the contingency status, we had a red flag in here that was only visible on this site and not transparent through to the other sites. So in the past I did a video on this, and basically buyers would see these houses that were that appeared to be available, but they were actually flagged as accepted offer, and we could only see that in this system, and they were being pushed through to the other systems as active. So it was really confusing and frustrating for people who were looking. Anyhow, scrolling down here, you can see active means that they're in here. Now, the most important thing that you can know about the MLS is that as an MLS member, there are different rules that we have to follow, okay? And there are different penalties for not following the rules. So I'm going to just pop into this one. Bang. You can see, sometimes I get calls from people asking, when can we see the house? Are there any disclosures? Here you can see that there's no disclosures, okay? And as far as showing it, this is something that basically is not sent to any of the websites, but it's available on every single listing in the MLS. Once you take a listing as a listing broker, you have to, and at the risk of being penalized and fined by the MLS, you have to put it into the system within 24 hours of signing the paperwork. So there's no pocket listings, there's no secret listings that our office or anybody else has. It's also important to know that each town has 300 or 400 different agents, so the chance that one agent's going to have a specific property that meets your very specific criteria is slim to less than zero, I would say. There are a few things that we do differently, me and my team, to find listings for buyers who have targeted a specific neighborhood, but the chance that somebody's just going to have the right listing hanging around secretly just doesn't happen. That's a kind of a throwback to the 1980s and before the MLS. So before the MLS, and again this is 1980s and before, basically each town received a book, an MLS book, and it had all the listings for that town. So you did have to go to that specific town and go to a specific agency within that town if you wanted the listings. Now we have access to all the information throughout all of Massachusetts, except for Cape Cod, portions of Cape Cod and the islands. Anyhow, what this means here, this is the listing broker for this property. There's 2 agents on it. This is how they want us to set up showings. Basically, this is a call service. They don't want us to email them. They don't want us to call them. In some cases we will, but the reality is when I have these set up, I want people to follow these directions because it's systematized and it's easy to use for me and the buyer agent. And so out of respect for the buyer listing agent, we do follow these rules and request. Here it's saying, okay, the listing agent is going to accompany. That means that they're going to be at the house. So we're going to be having to work around their schedule a little bit. Kind of inconvenient for most buyers, but that's how they've chosen to set this up. And 24-hour notice when possible. So if you call me and you want to see this 2 hours from now, it's probably not going to happen. We're probably going to have to wait until this time tomorrow or later. And over here it says what the fee would be to the buyer agent. So in this case, a lot of properties are listed at 5%, and in most cases the listing agent splits that with the buyer agent's office. So if I was to sell this property, 2.5% of the sale price would go to my office, and then they would pay me out of those proceeds. Okay. Over here, firm remarks. It just says, the offers are due by 9 o'clock, October 30th. So they haven't updated their listing. It's kind of something they should do. But in any case, this is an old comment. If it were me, I would remove that, but that's fine. Listing history. It's been on for just a few days. They put it under agreement. Probably the reason they did not update it is because it's already been put under agreement and there's nothing to worry about. So that's what we see on the back end. Now if you go over to some of the other parts here of the MLS, I'm just going to go to MLS PIN syndication. Okay. So we put the listing into the MLS within 24 hours of listing it, and then it goes to a number of different websites. Okay. Most of these people are familiar with: Boston.com, Trulia, Zillow. It's going to go to Remax.com. It's going to go to Century 21. It's going to go to Any Moves. It's going to go to Redfin. Basically, it's going to go to thousands of websites. But here's the catch. It's going to go to some of these websites faster than others, and only some data points are going to go to some of the websites. Okay, so a lot of times I have people calling and they're saying, look, I have this thing showing up in Trulia. I want to see this house, and the reality is that the house is already under agreement, and or Realtor.com, or sometimes even Boston.com. While I was at Coldwell Banker, and one of the reasons that I chose to leave is because of the way they syndicated their properties. So with them, there was a 24 to in some cases 48-hour lag time. So what that meant was that if you put a property in the computer, it wouldn't get syndicated to, say, Boston.com for as much as 2 days. And the same thing happens with the open house notifications. Once you put it in the MLS, it gets pushed out to these different websites. Boston.com, Trulia, Zillow. Those are the big ones in our area. Realtor.com a little bit. But it's really important to know that those contingency statuses, the under agreement statuses, sometimes they're not updated for 1 to 2 days, and sometimes not at all, depending on what the syndicate site is able to receive. Okay. MLS PIN pushes out this data every 15 minutes. That's about that's the most frequent push that they'll do. And so in any case, the data on some of these other sites, if you're looking at it that's 1 or 2 days late in a hot market, you may have already missed the property or not be aware of the open house. So the reason I tell you this is because my site and other sites that agents pay for, I pay a few $1,000s a year in order to have an updated and current site. And the bottom line is that when you're looking at my listings and my website, that's pulling from MLS every 15 minutes. And so the data is going to be the most current on a site where an agent's paying for it. And I'm not the only agent. There are a bunch of brokers out there that pay additional fees to have their sites updated, compared to some of the other syndicate sites where basically they're just trying to capture buyer leads. And then what they'll do is, Trulia, for example, you'll notice a lot of agents listed on the sidebar for Trulia, and that's a service that agents pay for. And basically the goal there is to pay for that spot, and ultimately a buyer will click on that, and it's a lead generator. So that's how those companies work, and that's why the Zillows and Trulias are around, because basically they're capturing leads and selling those buyer leads to agents. And so it's just important to know kind of what's happening and why it's happening and so on. But the again, bottom line, if you want the most current information, it's really kind of important just to go to the websites where people are paying a little bit more in order to have the information updated all the time. These are some syndicate sites that agents pay for. It's just kind of a list of syndicate sites that we can use that have agreements with MLS pins. So the company that I'm using is Diverse Solutions. After a lot of research, I found that this was probably the best available site out there. And so have fun, check out the website, and know that the data is going to be updated. And if you have any questions, as always, call me anytime.